getting this feed again from our partners at Flight Radar 24. In the meantime, we do have analysts, experts standing by. We're going to bring one in right now. I do want to say that we have Daoud joining us right now. And David, I just want to make sure you're connected with us here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. So thanks for joining us tonight. I'm just curious, what are your initial assessments? You're with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We talk with you guys closely as we've been following this war closely ever since October 7th. You guys have been helping us make sense of much of what's taking place in the Middle East. What's your initial assessment of what's taking place in Iran tonight? Well, this morning, I should say, in the Middle East.
Thank you for having me on, and we're a pleasure to work with you guys. Look, I think this was expected. It's almost impossible that Israel would have absorbed the strike of the type that Iran had launched last Saturday without some kind of retaliation. But this seems to have been done in coordination with the United States, as was promised. The United States didn't participate, as you noted, but it was kind of along the same parameters that were agreed upon. That this wouldn't lead to an escalation, that it would be kind of a pinpoint strike. It seems like it was enough for the Iranians themselves to absorb, and I mean, to some degree, they're pretending nothing happened.
Why is that? And you're the second person to bring that up tonight. What calculus is Iran making there? Why is it important to them to seem to almost play this as if this is a normal day for them?
Well, the strike that they launched against Israel, deadly and lethal as it was meant to shore up a flagging image of deterrence. The Israelis are dismantling Hamas bit by bit and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And basically this infrastructure, this terror infrastructure that Iran had spent nearly 20 years building in the Gaza Strip. Iran itself, its proxies, the ones that they put on Israel's borders, Hezbollah, Iraqi militias in Syria, they've been harassing the Israelis, but they've not gone into full combat with the Israelis. So Iran needed to show this image of strength, and I think that's part of what that attack was meant to demonstrate. And what you need there is to have the last word. If you admit that the Israelis, not only that your strike itself didn't cause much damage to Israel. This is a 7-year-old girl who was harmed in the attack, and she's in critical condition, and we wish for her speedy recovery. But beyond that, the attack didn't really cause that much damage. And then the Israelis, who, the Iranians and the resistance axis have already claimed are weak, and the narrative is that they're on the verge of collapse, they come back and strike back and have the last word, and perhaps do actual damage. Maybe it's a smaller strike, it's less noisy, it's less flashy, but it's a pinpoint strike, maybe it does more damage. That erodes the image of deterrence that you've created, that erodes the image of strength that you've sold to your base with the attack that you've launched on Israel.
So I don't want this to get lost on any of our viewers, the significance of the fact that this has been somewhat of a direct conflict between Israel and Iran. Do I have it correct that we've seen a lot of proxy fighting between the two, but is this the first time we've really seen tit for tat between Israel and Iran proper?
On a declared level, yes. There have been clashes. The IRGC was a participant in for example, in the 2006 Hezbollah-Israel war. We know this, but they weren't declared. The attack that we saw on Saturday, the Iranian attack on Israel, was the first time that Iran officially, openly attacked the state of Israel, and that brought the shadow war, this clandestine war that's been going on between the two sides, into the open for the first time.
Then, and I'm going to pull up a tweet here from Fox News foreign correspondent Trey Yingst. He says, remember that Israel has gone after Iran's nuclear program for years in different ways. The Israelis killed top Iranian nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in 2020. We don't know the exact target of the explosions overnight. It does get cut off there, but he says they certainly send a message that Israel can pull off such an attack. I've been talking about this with a few of our guests, the fact that Iran, to a degree, showed us what they're capable of on Saturday. Does it feel like today Israel is sort of flexing its military muscle and proving what it's capable of?
I think to a certain degree, right? This is Israel showing the extent of its long arm, the means that it can use to strike back, that it is not, in fact, deterred by the Iranians, that it is able to possibly strike them back. And Again, we don't know the exact target and the exact damage. We probably won't know. The Iranians themselves, like we mentioned, are going to remain mum on this. The Israelis have not commented. But both sides themselves know exactly what Israel struck. And this is going to send the message to Iran that if they harm the Israelis can reach them back and make it painful.
Why do you figure that Israel might not comment on what exactly they targeted?
I think because the Israelis are also busy elsewhere. There is Rafah, and that's a priority, taking care of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah on the northern border. And to take care of both of these problems, they're going to need international support, particularly United States support. And what the international community, and particularly the United States, as Israel's chief ally, have expressed that they do not want an escalation between Israel and Iran. This is kind of the agreement that went into effect between the Israelis and the United States immediately after Iran attacked, and it became clear that Israel was going to retaliate. Fine, just don't escalate. And part of not escalating is remaining calm. If you start rubbing Iran's losses in its face, it may be more inclined to continue this cycle of retaliation. This, to me, seems like the Israelis targeted in a manner, not just in terms of the military strike itself, but in terms of the publicity around the strike, in a manner that will allow Iran to get the message itself, but to save face, consider the matter closed. And the Iranians are doing the same with this denial.
I do want to put a fine point on what exactly transpired between the U.S. and Israel. What deal did they make in relation to Rafah and this retaliatory response that we're seeing tonight?
There have been reports that the deal between the United States and Israel is that if Israel either doesn't attack in Iran or maintains kind of a very limited strike, that the United States would work with Israel more closely to greenlight Rafah, that would kind of facilitate the greenlighting of Rafah, which again is a critical Israeli concern right now, because if Rafah isn't taken and Hamas's remaining battalions, which are holed up in Rafah, are not defeated, the organization will have a nucleus from which to regrow. Of course, the Iranians are waiting and hoping for such an eventuality, that a premature ceasefire will be implemented, where there is a nucleus, at least, of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and these other groups that they've been supporting for years, that they can then rebuild. And the Iranians are playing the long game. So it may take 10, may take 15 years, but we'll find ourselves in a situation very quickly that resembles October 6th again.
I'm going to ask a question that I feel is a pertinent one to ask in times of these attacks. I asked this question to many of our guests on Saturday when we were doing our breaking coverage of Iran's attack. I think it's an important thing for the viewers to understand the connection between what's happening between Israel and Iran right now and how it relates to the Israel-Hamas war. Can you connect the dots to the two scenarios, to the two situations for us?
Of course, Hamas is to a certain degree an Iranian proxy, and this, the relationship between the two sides has ebbed and flowed over years. But increasingly, Iran has been able to co-opt Hamas into its orbit of proxies that include Hezbollah, that include the militias in Iraq. Palestinian Islamic Jihad is a much closer proxy of the Iranian regime. There are reports that they are actually ideologically loyal to the regime in Iran on a level that even Hamas has not reached. And the Iranians have what we saw on October 7th, the capabilities, the weapons. Iran provided this. Iran helped train these organizations to conduct the attacks that we saw directly and via proxy. Hezbollah particularly has been threatening, for example, since February of 2011 to conduct an invasion of the Galilee. And, this is, it's not going to be a classical conquest of territory. This is beyond Hezbollah's capabilities. What that would have looked like is essentially what we saw on October 7th coming from the Gaza Strip into Israel. And given the close relationship between these two entities, they have, constant coordination in Lebanon. Hamas fighters train with and alongside Hezbollah in Lebanon, in Iran. There have been reports in Hezbollah media over the years about how Hezbollah has attempted to transfer capabilities, training, know-how, warfare capabilities to Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other Palestinian terrorist groups. They're interlinked, and this interlinkage helped Hamas and its partners that broke the border on October 7th to do what we saw. So this was an Iranian war against Israel. It always has been. And it was just done via proxy. And now we're seeing something coming out into the open.
Now that we're talking, now we've seen the Israeli response. We're not entirely sure if this response is over yet. Time will tell. But Iran has indicated that they will respond to this response. What avenues do they have of doing that? We were just talking about the proxies. Would Hezbollah be the main one to watch at this point?
Look, we could see, you know, Iran did act in a manner that I didn't predict. Certainly, I think was relatively unpredictable for most people when it engaged in this massive retaliatory strike after the Israelis had assassinated the IRGC Quds Force general in Iran. There's a possibility that they could be that reckless right now. I would kind of put that at the lowest. There is a possibility that they will attack through proxies in a more open manner. I think right now, though, they would not want to grant Israel the international legitimacy. And I distinguish this from the legal right. Israel, given what Hezbollah has been doing since October 8th, when they started attacking the Israelis, does have the legal right to engage in ground maneuvers, perhaps in self-defense against Hezbollah. But there's a matter of international legitimacy. There's a matter of the international community not wanting to broaden this war that exists in Gaza, as bloody as it is, into another front. And I think Hezbollah and the Iranians will not want to give the Israelis that international legitimacy to proceed with a massive ground invasion against Hezbollah in Lebanon. If Hezbollah does engage in a retaliation, mind you, they sat out the Iranian retaliation last Saturday. It'll probably be on a small scale. What's probably likely is that this will go back into the shadow realm, that we may see attacks on soft underbelly targets that Israel may find sensitive. Israelis abroad, something like Burgas in 2012, maybe an attack on an Israeli diplomatic mission. We've seen Iran do that, most infamously in Buenos Aires in 1992. Maybe attacks on a Jewish community center or a synagogue abroad. Something where Iran can send the message that we can make you hurt, but maintain the plausible deniability to not incur this continuous cycle of retaliation and counter-retaliation, a parallel almost to what the Israelis did today. Right? This was an open strike, but it wasn't. And I think the Iranians may decide that their interests now would be best served by reverting back to the shadow conflict.
It's important to also not forget that there is still an ongoing war in Gaza. The IDF is still actively working through and obviously, as we just spoke about, looming expanded ground incursion in Rafah is something that we've been watching closely. My question for you, though, as these ceasefire talks continue, and this is something that we've been talking about for weeks and weeks, more than a month probably at this point now, ceasefire talks continue, and I can only imagine that more Iran-Israel fighting and contention and friction, it can't be good for those talks. Does that sound about right to you?
Probably not, but the talks themselves have snagged on their own. Hamas appears to not have the requisite number of hostages that the Israelis are asking for. We saw reports yesterday that the Qataris are saying that the hostage talks may have stalled and may not proceed. Look, at the end of the day, what we see is that Hamas is not negotiating in good faith. And the Israelis are demanding a price. It's not going to be like before, where the Israelis are going to release 1,100 terrorists with blood on their hands for a single soldier. And I think that's going to complicate matters in and of itself. The Israeli mood right now, while the Israeli mood wants the hostages home as much as possible, there's not this mood for negotiation as much as possible, given what Hamas did on October 7th. I think that's the main issue that'll complicate matters rather than what's going on between Israel and Iran, rather.
What are the questions that you're most looking forward to getting the answers to as the hours progress and as we learn more about this strike in Iran?
I think the question that you asked, is this over from the Israeli side? And I think that's a critical one. Where does U.S. support and the U.S. position stand on this? Because I think that's going to be critical for the Israelis to determine further action. And what priorities do the Israelis have right now? Is responding and continuing to respond to Iran, given that this war has moved from the shadow realm into the public realm, going to overshadow Gaza? Or are the Israelis going to maintain a laser focus on Rafah, on eliminating what is essentially what I've been calling the southwestern front of the resistance axis on Israel's border. Is that going to remain the priority, or is the attack on Saturday going to shift Israeli priorities? I think that remains to be seen.
I'm curious, what exactly has Iran been saying in regards to how they will respond? I don't think they've given any specifics about how they will respond, but what sort of language have they been using?
Immediate response, overwhelming response, excuse me, weapons that they've never used before. Like you're saying, they're not disclosing the exact nature, but there's a lot of bravado, there's a lot of braggadocio, there's a lot of, I mean, if you follow the resistance axis, and I don't mean that as a positive, that's what they call themselves. You follow their media, you follow their leaders, you see that there's a tendency to exaggerate capabilities and the desire to do harm to your enemies. Part of this is to keep the other side guessing. In large part, it's also to maintain this image of strength, this image of having the upper hand upon which their support really depends. You look at an entity like Hezbollah. Most of its supporters aren't ideologues. There's a core that are, but as you go out, it's mostly some type of interest. One of which is that they bought this narrative that Israel or other entities are waiting a moment's notice to attack Lebanon with no provocation and murder them, and the only thing that's standing between them is Hezbollah and its military strength. But if Hezbollah is shown to be weak and incapable of deterring or defeating Israel, its efficacy is reduced in the eyes of its supporters. Hezbollah obviously doesn't want that. So I think part of this noise that the resistance axis tends to create, part of these exaggerations and threats, is meant to maintain this image of strength for their supporters. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to act on them.
I see the Israeli newscast going on behind you, and I got to ask,
yes.
How is Israeli media reacting to this?
Rather calmly. They seem to be analyzing this rather matter-of-factly. Because of the military censor in Israel, they're mainly relying on foreign reports. There's a lot of analysis. There's a little bit of surprise, but not so much surprise, that the Israeli military and the government have decided to maintain, at least before I muted it, maintaining total silence on this issue. And I think the assessment has been the same, that the Israelis are sending the message, meaning it to hurt in the right way, but also signaling to the Iranians, this is done. We're not trying to embarrass you. Let's call it a day.
Does it seem like every effort was made, at least while we sit here in the preliminary moments of this news story, does it seem like Israel and the U.S. are trying as best as they can to work within the unwritten rules of this war, but yet still send a message to Iran in the process? Is that what's happening here?
I think so. From what we've heard, what's been reported so far, the Israelis did not use fighter jets. The Americans, the United States, did not participate. Small drones appear to have been used to carry out the strike. It seems to have been a pinpoint strike on the air base, on the base from which the drones that were fired at Israel were launched. This was pinpoint. I haven't heard any news of casualties. The reporting from Iran, from Esfahan, from different places, shows life proceeding as normal. There wasn't an attempt to kind of create this massive disruption of life. So, this kind of reverts back to the shadow war. And maybe this is the message the Israelis are sending. We're taking this back a step to the shadow war, where these things have happened. Right? Over the years, we've heard reports of drones that have been attributed to Israel that have conducted pinprick strikes against painful targets in Iran, strategically important targets. But we haven't heard of reports of casualties, certainly not civilian casualties. So I think there is this attempt to take it back to the rules of the game, as you noted.
And this was a question I got quite a bit after Saturday's news, what differentiates what's happening right now, Israel and Iran going head-to-head to a degree, what differentiates this situation from this feared wider conflict that everybody's been afraid of since October 7th? Because all indicators seem to point to the fact that we're not quite at that place that we fear yet, but still things have been escalating, David, right?
They have, but look, the resistance axis writ large is not where it wants to be. One thing they emphasize is that they want to have the initiative. They will strike at a time and in a place that is most suitable to their interests. They're not going to cede the initiative to the Israelis. This is why Hezbollah for years has been assiduously avoiding giving the Israelis an excuse to launch a massive invasion against them in Lebanon. And I think the project that they have against Israel, yes, they wish to destroy it, but it's not in some kind of caricature fashion. It's through 1,000 paper cuts. It's by building up capabilities, a ring of fire around Israel, making sure that their domestic situations, be it in Lebanon, the Gaza Strip, in Syria, in Yemen, are able to handle what they know will be a massive Israeli and painful Israeli military retaliation. They have, in their more sober moments, as much as they would like to mock Israel's strength and longevity and durability, they are acutely aware, and they express their awareness of Israel's vast conventional military superiority. So they know that if the Israelis are going to respond, they're going to be able to withstand it, not just they themselves, but their domestic base. And beyond that, I think in an ideal world for the resistance axis, which would be the antithesis of the ideal world for Israel, Iran would have a nuclear weapon. And this isn't because necessarily Iran would drop the nuclear weapon on Israel, but it would be able to grant a nuclear umbrella to these militias, to these proxies, to create a new status quo. Imagine a scenario where Iran activates its proxies on Israel's northern or southern border if Hamas is allowed to survive. Daily rockets. The Israelis deem this situation as intolerable, kind of like an October 7th situation. And the Israelis decide that they're going to go all in to destroy whichever group is now threatening their security. And Iran deems this unacceptable. They rattle the nuclear saber. Now, from the Israeli calculus, right, you can look at it this two ways, right? The Iranians want to be masters of the Muslim world, not just the Shia world. You drop a nuclear weapon in Israel, you risk destroying Muslim holy sites, killing Arabs, killing Muslims. That doesn't really work hand in hand with leadership of the Muslim world. At the same time, Israel doesn't have a second strike capability because of its size. Not that it doesn't have the weapons, but its tiny size means if a single nuclear weapon is able to hit Gush Dan, which is the area around Tel Aviv, kind of central Israel, where Israel's main population is concentrated, there really isn't a point to a second strike. The state of Israel basically would probably suffer a mortal blow. Do you really want to take the chance, if you're an Israeli prime minister or the defense minister or the chief of staff, that Iran is crazy enough, that Iran is reckless enough, that it has cast its aspirations to lead the Muslim world aside in that moment? You can't. So the nuclear saber is rattled. Israel stops in its tracks because it can't take that chance. And this allows Iran and its proxies to create a new status quo. Daily rockets on the north, daily rockets from the south, that, as we've seen now, kind of a preview of this in the north, Israeli civilians have moved out, and you slowly and gradually push back the state of Israel into non-existence. I think that's the goal. We're not there yet, fortunately, but I think that's Iran's aspiration, and it will not activate its proxies and risk damaging them prematurely before it's in that position where it can use them to maximum effect.
To our knowledge, can those proxies act on their own, or are they completely beholden to what Iran says?
Look, there's a hierarchy in the resistance axis. Iran does obviously sit at the top. At the same time, because Iran's desire is to grow its regional hegemony, it does take into consideration the desires and circumstances of its proxies. So after the October 7th attack, right, on October 8th, Hezbollah starts attacking. And I think the big question then is, when is Iran's star proxy going to enter this war? But what we also saw were visits by Iranian officials, namely Amir Abdullahian, the foreign minister, but also, according to some reports, Ismail Ghani, the head of the Quds Force, to Lebanon to meet with Hezbollah. Now, the content of these meetings was not disclosed, only that they occurred. But to my mind, what happened there was that the Iranian officials sat with their Hezbollah counterparts and said, hey, given your circumstances, given what's going on with you in Lebanon, given the constraints that the economic collapse in Lebanon is placing on your activities, this doesn't mean that Hezbollah is weak, and it means they're trying to navigate a sensitive situation. What can you do? What contribution can you give without kind of going past that line, past which you will, the returns outweigh the damage outweighs any returns. So I think this is kind of the dynamic between Iran and its proxies, and it makes sense because the Iranians outsource, like this is the whole point of having proxies that are made up of locals. In Hezbollah, it's Lebanese, right? They're loyal to Iran, but they understand the pulse of Lebanon. Same thing in Iraq and Yemen and so on. The whole point is that you don't have to have a massive intelligence apparatus to know what's going on within Lebanon and what capabilities you can and can't activate within Lebanon. You can outsource that knowledge to people who are from the country who have a sense of it. It seems kind of a waste if you do that and then you don't take their opinion into consideration at all. And it seems to me that they do, because they don't want to lose these proxies when they don't have to.
David, is there any other angle to this that we haven't touched on, or is there anything that you wish guys like me would ask you about these subjects before we wrap up here?
I think we've touched on everything. I mean, for me, the main issue is Hezbollah. Keep looking at the north and keep looking at the Israeli side on that, because I think Hezbollah has crossed the line that they probably can't walk back from. I'm sure there's probably some regret that they did that. And it's given the Israelis an opportunity that they've not had in 24 years, not even in 2006, to inflict massive punishment on Hezbollah if they are able to garner the legitimacy that's necessary to do so. And if they do so, this is the tip of Iran's spear, right? This is the entity when Iran enters Iraq after we invade Iraq in 2003. Hezbollah is there first to lay the groundwork. When Iran enters Syria in 2011, Hezbollah is there to lay the groundwork. Same thing in Yemen, in the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. So if you damage Hezbollah to a point where it can't recover, then you've also damaged Iran's regional reach. And I think keeping the eye on Hezbollah and on the Israeli reaction to Hezbollah is critical.
And we are looking at a new tweet from Trey Yanks saying that Iranian state media is downplaying the strike overnight, something that we already have been watching as they've been downplaying this for much of the night so far. Okay, David, you have been so gracious. You've been so nice to us with your time tonight. We very much appreciate you. Take care.
Thank you so much, Austin. It's been a pleasure.